Councillor Panel, you're running ahead of the agenda.
Well, no, no, it could be. I'm just referring to declarations of interest, of which there were none.
Well, can we just deal with that in a second, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So we've got an explanation now of why the meeting is being held and why there weren't 5 due days notice, but there couldn't have been in order for us to get this meeting in on time before council. I'm now going to ask the Chief Executive to speak before we move on to the agenda item.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to make a statement, if I may. On learning of Councillor Hopwood's action in arranging for a private contractor to make a one-off collection of garden waste within her ward, as head of paid service, I asked the monitoring officer to speak with Councillor Hopwood. The monitoring officer has done so. The monitoring officer has explained clearly to Councillor Hopwood that no matter how well intentioned her actions were, she acted contrary to the decision of the executive. Consequently, she was likely to have brought the council into disrepute and failed to act in accordance with the council's requirements as to the use of her locality's fund. Both of these are breaches of the Code of Conduct and of the standards of behaviour expected of councillors. I understand that Councillor Hopwood has agreed with the monitoring officer to give a public apology.
Councillor Hopwood, would you like to respond, please?
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Chairman. Members and officers may be aware that I organised a collection of brown bins within the Woolwell ward, which I represent. I sought officer advice about paying for this to be done out of my locality budget after misunderstanding the advice given, and went ahead with what I had organised in all good faith. I have since been contacted by the monitoring officer and subsequently met with him, Mr. Fairburn, who advises that not only was the organising of waste collections within my ward against what the executive had agreed, which was to suspend the garden waste service, but I informed residents that this would be paid for out of my locality budget, as I had genuinely misunderstood the advice given by officers. I offer an unreserved apology to both officers and members, and I've assured the monitoring officer that this will not happen again. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hopwood. I'm going to ask the monitoring officer if he wishes to say anything.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I'm satisfied from speaking with Councillor Hopwood and the full and public apology that you just heard, that the wrongdoing, that there won't be a further repetition of the wrongdoing, and I'm satisfied that that is the end of the matter.
Thank you very much. Right, well, members of the executive will now move on to consideration of the paper. First of all, members of the executive, do you have any questions on the paper? I think we've been through it enough for there not to be any questions. No?
Nothing further.
No, okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to move the recommendations.
Questions from non-members of the executive?
You may ask a question. Yes, Councillor Birch.
Okay. I've got several questions. So, as far as item 2.1 on the paper, where it says that in so many words that the garden waste service, I quote, the garden waste service is free of charge to residents. My question is this. I've got in my possession here an email that was sent to me by Mr. Molyneux, which sets out the amount being charged to this council by FCC for the brown bin collection. I won't mention
Councillor Birch, this is not part of this report. We are not talking about the financial implications in this report.
No, I'm trying to correct. I'm trying to correct or ask a question leading to a possible correction of 2.1, where it's stated that the garden waste service is free of charge.
To residents?
It is free of charge.
It is free of charge to residents.
Sorry, can I complete my question? Yes? So it's saying that it's free of charge, but the fact of the matter is that this council is charged by FCC for the brown bin collection. Can I please finish? That being the case, there is a charge to this council for the brown bin collection, and that is included within the sum to be paid by residents in respect of their council tax. In other words, in the council tax they pay, it includes the payment to FCC for the brown bin collection. So it is incorrect. Is it incorrect to state that it is free to residents when in fact residents pay council tax to cover the collection of the brown bin? That's the question.
This question was already posed in your recommendations that you made to council. I'll just remind you, it was number 5. Council tax levied by the council includes a sum for the collection of garden waste, and yet taxpayers are not receiving a service for which they have paid. And you put an extra 4 in, which wasn't correct. You'd already got one, but never mind. So
we'll come on to that.
And we're coming on to that. So please do not preempt.
No, I'm sorry, but what
Well, we're going to answer that question. We're going to answer that question as part of our consideration of your recommendations, because you've already asked that. You've already posed that question at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and that's what we're here this morning to answer. So we will not answer that now. We will answer that as part of our discussions later in the meeting.
So I'm being clear on this. I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood, because you were moving on to the debate. Therefore, I thought that once you were moving on to a question, will there be an opportunity for me to ask further questions on this paper?
That's irrelevant to the point. That's irrelevant to the point. Councillor Birch, we are here this morning because of recommendations that were put by you that you did not consult.
They were put by you.
They were put by you because
you put them
because many of the members of your committee were not consulted on those recommendations, as you well know. And so we are here this morning exclusively because you have put these recommendations to council and did not consult your committee properly, and we're now going to consider them ourselves now. So, are there any further questions?
Yes, I have a question on 4.3.1. So, just so we're clear on this, the question is, who instructed the contractor to collect the brown bin waste? Was it this council or was it Councillor Hopwood?
We've already stated that.
I've asked a question and I expect
listen to the answers that you've already given. Listen to what...
my question not directed to you, Councillor Baston. I want who instructed the contractor to place... Who instructed the contractor to carry out the brown bin collection? Was it Councillor Hopwood or was it
I
this
think
council?
Councillor Hopwood has already answered that.
So it's Councillor Hopwood?
Yes.
It's Councillor Hopwood?
Yes.
Therefore, there was a contract formed between Councillor Hopwood and this brown bin collector. Is that correct? Can I ask the monitoring officer just to confirm that? In other words, when Councillor Hopwood informed agreed with this contractor to collect the brown bins, that effectively gave rise to a contract between Councillor Hopwood and this contractor. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Thank you.
Actually, before we go on, can I just remind members to be a little more respectful to each other and want to respond? I did circulate an email a few weeks ago reminding members that one person speaks at a time and shows respect for the chair. Thank you.
For the chair. Yes, thank you. I think I do have the right to overrule you, Councillor Birch, if I want to. Right.
I would like to know then which part of the standing orders that you're trying to shut me up, because I am trying to comply with the Constitution and standing orders. And what you're doing is trying to suppress my questions, and you've not given a valid reason for doing that.
I think I did, because I said we were going to deal with that later in the agenda, and that you had put the question, you had put the recommendations, and we are assembled here this morning to consider the recommendations which you, I believe exclusively, put forward to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, because some members of that committee did not have sight of them before they got into that meeting.
It's not correct.
I think it is correct. Anyway, right. So we'll move on to the business of considering the... Oh, sorry, we have some more questions. It's slightly reliant on having a little message here from Darryl. We've got Councillor Hodgson who wants to ask a question. Councillor Hodgson, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry I can't join you this morning. Obviously, I've got remembrance events at 11 o'clock, like I'm sure a lot of us have. Yeah, I just want to, my question is, what do we say to residents in other, for example, my ward, Dartington and Staverton, where there's been huge disruption ongoing? What do I say to them when they say, well, look, if it's all right for Woolwell, why can't that be arranged for us too? Because if the council tax or the council's money is that now released to pay for what Councillor Hopwood has ordered, then surely that has to be made available to the other places which are not getting their garden waste collected. This is, I mean, I think this is really serious, and I want to know exactly what the position is, because otherwise it's just left in the muddle. If we just underwrite it and say, oh yeah, that's fine, then it's actually leaving us in an invidious position with the other residents throughout the district. So what's the answer to them?
Councillor Hodgson, I think the answer to that is given in section 4 of the report, which shows that this was not a viable way of collecting bins. There were issues with it, and it certainly wouldn't be applicable to the whole of the district.
Well, in my view, if I may, I think it's actually very, very strange, this, and I just think that, I mean, if I was in Councillor Hopwood's position, I would honour it myself, because I think otherwise it's risking this council being put into disrepute, because it's actually taking advantage of a position of executive to order something.
Hodgson, that isn't a question. That's a statement. Councillor Kemp.
How is that now to be paid for then? The council are actually going to pay for that pickup? Yes? Are the council paying for that pickup in Woolwell? Please.
Mr. Molyneux, would you like to answer that question, please?
Yes, well, assuming that the executive authorises this, then yes, the council will pay for it. That's what the paper says.
Right, so if I collate the invoices from my residents, can they be paid for by the council as well?
Would you like to give a passing that, please?
Yes, Leader. Councillor Hopwood has left the room on the basis that obviously she may well have an interest in the matter that's going to be discussed, and if it's discussed further, it's appropriate that she meet.
Of course, thank you. Could you answer Councillor Kemp's question about these, Mr. Fairbairn? About
Sorry, I missed the question.
Would we pay for members of the public who've paid other operators to empty the bins?
We don't have the legal powers to do that.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Callaghan, next, please.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't think that's an adequate answer to my question.
It is the answer to your question.
It's not adequate, though.
Well, it is the answer. You may not like it, but it is the answer. Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, not surprised she doesn't like it. Well, I'm amazed at all this. It looks like a retrospective decision, conflating somebody's mistake and a trial, and suddenly being sort of sprung on us at 5 minutes' notice. We were talking, my question is, we were talking in overview and scrutiny about measures we might take, and members, including myself, were suggesting measures, for example, using private waste contractors in this way. And we were told that we couldn't really do it for one because we had to do it for everybody. I clearly remember that. Nobody mentioned at that point what had been happening in Woolwell. It would have been pertinent to that discussion at overview and scrutiny. So we were actually discussing something without the full facts of what has been happening. So something is certainly not right here. We were asking about using private contractors. I remember Councillor Spencer was talking about how about we do it in different areas, use different contractors, and it must have been known that this had already happened, and we didn't know that. So how did that happen, please?
I think the report sets that out, Councillor Callaghan. In section 4, the whole thing. I'd be
obliged if this could be spoken about as well, rather than just hidden in reports, which we.
Councillor Hopwood acted in what
I got last night.
Councillor Hopwood acted in what she thought was the best interests of her residents, but she realised afterwards that it was actually a mistake. But the usefulness of the exercise, if there was one, was that it proved that it was not a viable means of collecting from all properties in the district. And I think the learning from that was valuable, although she should have done it.
And certainly we should all have been informed of this at a public meeting at the overview and scrutiny, because it was pertinent to our discussions and it was known about, and we didn't know it.
Not it today.
It's not right.
Well, that's your opinion, but you've asked the question, you've been given an answer. Do we have any more questions, Mr. White? Right. So I will now. Do you want to make the recommendations, Councillor Baldry, please? All right. Well, you're seconded. Sorry. No. Okay. Well, I've moved the recommendations in the report.
Do you want me to introduce the paper?
Yes, please, if you would. Thank you.
As has emerged from the preliminary question and answer, effectively this is a paper in 2 parts. It is first of all for the executive to consider their response to the overview and scrutiny panel's recommendation to go to full council, and the second part is to discuss what happened in Woolwell. Going briefly through the paper, if I can, Leader, just to emphasise that it is for full council to consider the recommendations of overview and scrutiny, and that will take place on the 25th of November, the next full council meeting. Mention has been made, I'm sorry to fall out with my own paper, which is about whether it or not it is a free service. I think it is unfortunate in paragraph 2.2 we continue to remind the public that Southampton is the only authority in Devon that offers a free year-round garden waste service, because at the moment we ain't offering any garden waste service, and I think it just is a bit of a flag for the public to take advantage of, to say there's no point in it being free if we haven't got any sort of service. As outlined in the paper, Leader, there has been very little improvement in the service offered by FCC. But what small improvement that has come, I am certain, is because of the suspension of the garden waste service, which has given them some additional resource to do it. But nevertheless, the level of the service is still totally unacceptable. Turning to the question of Woolwell, Councillor Hopwood put her hands up and said she got it wrong. She shouldn't have done it. To be frank, Leader, I was fairly vexed when it took place at all. But what we have done, if there is anything that's come out of this, is first that the cost was £3,500 even for Woolwell, a very cheap cost of £2.70 a bin, but it still exceeded Councillor Hopwood's locality budget in any case. But what has definitely come out of it is that the contractor couldn't cope. And if they can't cope in a place like Woolwell with very close houses close together, I think we approved it wouldn't work elsewhere. And as you will see in the paper, the cost of the district would be astronomical, even if we could find a series of contractors to do it. And I think it proves that getting piecemeal bits and pieces of ground being emptying taking place is not practical. End.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baldry. Now, so we will move on now to, I think it's Appendix 1, isn't it? Where we have the
Appendix B.
It's Appendix B. Sorry, it's Appendix B, where we have the wording of the recommendations that were put to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So we're going to take them in turn. Number one is that there was insufficient consideration and or reporting given to the implementation of option 3, being the use of an alternative provider, and in particular the possibility of garden waste collection being taken back in-house. So I think the executive's response to this is that in addition to the details in the report, officers and the lead member provided a comprehensive update at the executive meeting on the 14th of October of the process and investigations undertaken to assess what was operationally feasible within a realistic timescale. Councillor Baldry, would you like to respond to the next two? Because I think you've.
Thank you, Leader. If I can take 2 and 3 together and give a single answer to 2 and 3. The council has followed and continues to follow the correct contractual procedural arrangements regarding the suspension of the garden waste service. That process is a formal contractual change notice issued on the 22nd of October.
Right, so the next question, question 4, the decision to suspend the garden waste collection until an open-ended spring date leaves many residents with their brown bins containing waste for an indefinite period. Councillor Baldry, I think you're going to deal with that one because it's directly connected to the service. Right.
At its meeting on October 14th, the executive resolved to produce a letter to be sent to all residents. That letter was delivered to residents in the week commencing the 1st of November. Draft minute E2156 states that delegated authority be granted to the Director for Customer Services and Delivery in consultation with the Leader of the Council and me, the lead executive member, to produce a letter to be sent on behalf of the executive to all residents in the South Hams that provides an update on the waste and recycling collection service. And that has been done. The executive has asked officers to continue to explore options for carrying out a collection. Recommendation 3 in the current report, which is before us today. And para 4.4 in the same report states, the executive has asked FCC to provide a detailed plan to the council by 31st of December for restarting the service by 31st of March 2022 or sooner.
Thank you. And recommendation 5, that the council tax levied by the council includes a sum for the collection of garden waste, and yet taxpayers are not receiving a service for which they have paid. Councillor Bastone, I think finance is your reply, so would you like to reply to that one, please?
Thank you. Yeah. To explain the background of the council tax legislation, council tax is partly a form of general taxation on a property and partly a tax on the people living in that property. Council tax actually funds essential services in an area, and the cost of the public services is spread across all taxpayers in the same way, regardless of which services they use or receive. So when you pay your council tax, it is not as simple as paying for and receiving a service. By law, the council is unable to give a council tax discount to households that may not receive a specific service or receive a poor service. Therefore, we are not able to offer any reduction in your council tax bill, as council tax is a form of general taxation rather than a service charge. We continue to prioritise the services which we have a statutory duty to provide, such as refuse and recycling collections. Garden waste is non-statutory service which has been provided at the council's discretion. Unfortunately, we are not able to offer a refund of council tax. Council tax is a way of funding councils and other statutory agencies for the various services they provide. Waste collections are only one of the many services we provide as a district council. It is not the same as having a contract for one specific service.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bastow. Now, members of the executive, can we invite Councillor Hopwood back in for this particular part of the agenda?
My advice would be that no.
All right, that's fine. Okay. Right, so members of the executive, we have met and agreed these responses, and they will be reported to council. Can I have your agreement on that, please? Yes, okay, so we have all met. Right, now, I know that there are a number of questions. In particular, I think there's one that's popped up in the question box that Mr. White has shown me from Councillor Kemp, who says that she understands a similar service to Woolwell has been organised in Thurleston. I can answer that question, Councillor Kemp. There is a resident in Thurleston who is the parish clerk for, I'm not sure whether it's Yampton or Wembury, Yampton, where there has been a private contractor circulating, knocking on doors and emptying bins for a charge. This resident of Thurleston circulated circulated people who live on his estate, which does not include me, I might say, to say that he was arranging for this contractor to visit Thurleston on a certain date, and if individuals wish to put their bins out and pay the contractor individually, he would take their brown bin waste away. I had nothing to do with this. I understand the contractor did turn up and did empty people's bins, but in the end, it wasn't as many bins as the contractor had been hoping to empty, as I understand it from people who told me about it afterwards. But it was absolutely nothing to do with me, and it was a private arrangement between individuals and the collection service, and I understand that's been going on in several parts of the district. Councillor Baldry.
Thanks to the Union Leader, if I may. The fact that this individual is the clerk of the Yampton Parish Council, just for the record, it is nothing whatsoever to do with Yampton Parish Council.
No, exactly. Sorry. The only reason I think is because he had found out about this individual contractor from Yampton, from people in Yampton, but it was nothing to do with the parish council at all.
No, no such services operating in Yampton. But as you rightly say, this is no different, Councillor Kent, from what is happening all over the district, where private contractors are going around emptying people's bins at a charge which varies from £4 to 14, as I understand.
Yeah.
But the resident is paying, not this council.
That's right. And they have voluntarily done it as well. Right, so we have other questions. Councillor Hodgson, I think you're first on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I thought this was debate now, so I wish to make some points, because I just think that actually we need to have a proper scrutiny on this. And I'm here because I'm absolutely appalled by what I'm actually witnessing. I think this is actually just trying to cover up our dirty tracks. And I don't want to be any party of a decision that actually approves this payment. I mean, I'm not, because I'm not in the executive, I'm not on overview, but I certainly think this is something that we're opening a door to a lot of accusations, a lot of, I think it's just disrepute. I don't think we should pay this, because I mean, I have people in my ward as well who have gone out of their way to pay for their own service, their own waste to be collected, and have come back to me and said, well, if we can organise it and pay for it, why can't the council pay for it? Because that's part of our agreement on the council tax. So this is really messy, and I think it's very wrong to cover this payment. It means that any of us could come back and say, oh, I made a mistake, I didn't understand what my locality budget was for. I mean, that just doesn't ring true, not after sort of a few years of being a councillor. So I just don't think this should be allowed at all, and I just feel otherwise this meeting is going to be seen as just a cover up. And I don't think it's good for the council to actually find itself in that position. So I would call on all of you to not approve this, and just, if somebody organises something that's not approved, then they take the risk of having to pay for it. And it's not good. It's a lot of money, but I don't think the council should pay for it. Thank you.
No comment, Councillor Hodgson. Just before I move on to any other people who want to ask questions, does anybody want to make any comments on the what we've just talked about from the executive? I don't think so, because we have discussed it beforehand. But Councillor Baldry, do you want to
I don't want to make any comments on that, but I think, can we treat them as separate issues, really?
Exactly.
What we have put before the executive, agreed by the executive, is our response to the overview and scrutiny panels once they wish to go to full council. We can deal with Woolwell as you wish, Leader, but on what we have just presented are our answers to the overview and scrutiny panel to go to full council, where it will have a further discussion.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So is there anybody who's asking a question, who wants to ask a question on what we have just discussed, which is our response to the overview and scrutiny recommendations? Councillor Birch, this might be an opportunity for you to come in if you want to.
Thank you. I just think there's listening to, I mean, bear in mind, can we just put in context as to what arose from the ONS? It was not a recommendation, it's concerns. We, under the Constitution, overview and scrutiny is when it has a call-in, it makes its concerns known, in this case to full council. So what is happening here today is not your response to recommendations, it's a response to the concerns. I think that's the important thing. And I think this...
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, so I think where there's been a misunderstanding as to the nature of the concerns, which I've listened to the executive's response to these concerns. I think that the main area of continuing concern, as far as I'm concerned, is this: is that the original recommendation that was being put to ONS was amended as a result of discussions with the Chief Executive and with Mr. Fairbairn. Now, in order to keep the discussion in open session rather than going to part two, I took the advice of the Chief Executive and Mr. Fairbairn and amended the recommendation that went to ONS so that it could be kept in kept in open session. Now, what I think will need to happen in the full council, so that the members will be fully aware of what is behind these concerns, is that we may need to go into part two. And the reason for this, and I'll try and be careful the way I say this because I don't want to run foul of Mr. Fairbairn, is that there is a charge being made, and please stop me Mr. Fairbairn, if I'm overstepping the mark. There is a charge being made by FCC to this council for the collection of the brown bins. I have here an email from Mr. Molyneux that sets out what these charges are. I was asked not to disclose those, and I'm not disclosing them now, and that's why one of the reasons that your recommendation was amended. What I think, when we come to full council and it is the view of the monitoring officer that those charges should be dealt with in part two, then they will need to be dealt with in part two. The point that I was seeking to make is that if you run from the middle of August, when the suspension of the brown bins commenced, to say the middle of April, which that's my interpretation of when it's spring, let's say it's spring, there's 8 months. And there are 8 months that this council has not had to pay FCC, or let's say there is possibly 8 months of monies that are possibly not being paid to FCC. And when one is aware of the amounts involved, I took the view that should have been part of the discussion or part of the paper that came forward the executive. And when the paper that went to the executive says that there are no financial implications, in my view, that is incorrect. In other words, the report did not contain some really important information. So And it was difficult to incorporate that within the concerns that now go before full
Could you bring
council.
your comments to a close, please?
Yes, you're right. I'm just trying to explain the position. So that being the case, what I think will be necessary at full council, unless there's a change of mind by the monitoring officer, that part of the discussion will need to be in part two. So I'm just putting that forward as something that needs to be taken into account. I could say more, but
Councillor Birch, we've already given you an answer to that question this morning to say that the council is following the correct contractual procedure regarding the suspension of the garden waste service. Now, that process is a formal contractual change notice issued on the 22nd of October. Now, that's as far as we can go in telling you anything at the moment, but we may have further information on that by the time we go to council. We may not. Yes, but I'm going to ask Mr. Bates to comment on this.
Thank you, Leader. So, Councillor Birch is absolutely correct. He did seek my advice, and he took my advice in terms of the debate in ONS. I absolutely accept that. As the Leader has said, and in providing the answer, the relevant point was that the process is a formal contractual change notice issued on the 22nd of October. That was the answer that has just been given. I'd absolutely agree with you, Councillor Birch, if members in full council wish to debate fully all of the aspects of this in terms of the cost of this part of the service, then I would absolutely agree that would be better to be dealt with in exec session. And of course, I'm sure that Mr. Fairbairn, as monitoring officer, will provide that advice at the time of the meeting. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question, or are you satisfied with that reply to your comment?
Well, I wasn't asking you a question. I was just making a comment. You invited me to make a comment.
Okay.
I made a comment.
Are you satisfied with the response you've had? Okay, fine. So let's move on. Yeah, do you want to say something else?
Purely on that, I've listened to everything that the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel has said, and I shall look further into it. And if we change our view, I shall bring it back when we come to full council.
Thank you. Right. Councillor McKay is next. Question, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can, okay. I'm afraid I'm having to go back to the Woolwell thing just briefly in response to something Councillor Baldry said, and it's also in the paper here, that the cost of the pickup in Woolwell was 3,500, and that exceeded the localities fund by some margin. Clearly, Councillor Hopwood would have been aware that it was exceeding her localities budget, so I don't really understand how this money is being paid. It's not coming out of the localities budget. The explanation we're given is that she was advised that she could use her localities budget, but it's in excess of the localities budget. So I don't understand the logic there, and I would quite like to understand what exactly was the advice that she received, which she misunderstood. I think that's important in order to fully understand the situation. That's question number one. The other question is to do with 4.4 in the paper. You talk about a detailed plan will be provided by 31st of December. I assume that is for the full delivery of the full recycling service, or is this just referring to the green, the brown bin collections? And either way, if it's not delivered, what is the council's plan? Given the history to date, I hope there is a plan. That's my question.
Right, thank you, Councillor McKay. Members, does anybody? Sorry, could you repeat the second part of your question? Because I'm having IT problems, and I'm afraid I was trying to sort them out, and I wasn't entirely listening to what you were saying.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's to do with 4.4. you talk about the report talks about the 31st of December being a deadline. Is this a deadline for the full service recovery plan, or is this just to do with brown bins? But either way, what is if this deadline is missed? What are the plans of the council? I assume that you have some expectation that it will be missed and have a plan.
Councillor Baldry, would you like to answer that part of the question?
Mr. Molyneux will join in. It is for a plan for the full restoration of the garden waste service to come in across the district, and as we will have to wait and see what FCC produced. History tells me not to be over hopeful.
So you don't. It sounds like you don't have a plan. Okay, but can you answer the first part of my question?
Is that a bit relating to Woolwell?
Yes.
Well, I will lead. I think we've covered an awful lot of it.
I think so.
Councillor Hopwood got it wrong. The monitoring officer told her she had got it wrong. She has apologised at this meeting today,
No, sorry to interrupt, but I had a very specific question. The cost was £3,500, which exceeds the localities fund. So clearly, it was not ever expected to be paid out of the localities fund because there was not enough money in the pot. So the monies that have been paid will not have come out of the localities fund. I would like to understand what exactly was the advice that Councillor Hopwood received that she apparently misunderstood.
2 points on that. First, my understanding is from conversations with Councillor Hopwood, at the time she said it would come out of her localities fund, and said that wrongly, in my opinion, that she expected the cost to be less, and it has subsequently turned out to be that the take-up exceeded what she expected. I cannot tell, I have not seen what advice she was given by officers, but it is my belief that no officer actually said that she could do it within the localities fund. Mr. Molyneux.
Can I just add something to that before Mr. Molyneux comes in? Councillor McKay, it is perfectly possible that she would have that amount in her localities budget where it's being used, because any underspends from previous years are carried forward into the present year. So if she hadn't spent her full amount we're in year 3 now, she could well have that amount in her budget. You may not have it in yours, but she could have it in hers. Now I'll ask Mr. Molyneux to reply, please.
Yes, so I actually provided the advice to Councillor Hopwood, and I said to her in an email reply that I thought it was an idea that needed to be looked into from the localities perspective, and I also asked Councillor Hopwood to go back and consult with the executive, and I said that one of the reasons for that is that I was concerned that even if it could be funded from localities, it would create an inequitable service across the district, because some members will have spent their locality funding and some members may not choose to do that. So it would effectively be divisive and put members in a difficult position. So that was the advice I gave. So the first bit, which was, it was a good idea that needed consideration in terms of the use of what could be funded and whether it would work. And I asked her to consider advice, and she mistakenly took that good idea into effectively approval, which it was not.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Smurden.
Thank you, Chair. The thing that concerns me, I understand that the member has done what she's done and has apologised, but we've heard from Mr. Fairbairn that shouldn't have happened. I am concerned as to how the executive can then use that that example as or that operation as an example to then say that they that it's not cost effective, etc., to do a similar sort of thing. I mean, you know, for example, it says there that the contractor used 2 vehicles and one of them broke down. I'm very concerned that we've already heard, you know, that this, you know, sadly shouldn't have happened. I don't understand how the executive can then use that that costed operation to show that we can't do it. If the council was going to investigate this then surely we should do it properly. You know, contractor, you know, do it in an area somewhere, contract it properly, so that it is, you know, it's properly overseen. I'm very concerned as that decisions are being made on the basis of a flawed exercise. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, Councillor Smurden, I think this shouldn't have happened. It did happen, but I think there was certain learning that we can have from the exercise, seeing as it did happen. What was plain was, first of all, that from the health and safety perspective, the vehicles probably weren't suitable for the waste that was being emptied out of the bins. There were no bin lifters on the back of the trucks, and therefore the men were manhandling them themselves, which probably was not a safe procedure. And the fact that they were using small cage-side trucks meant that actually one of them broke down on the second day because the weight on the truck was too great. So I think all that indicates that the usual kind of small contractor who collects things from people's houses probably was not a suitable way of organising this around the district. And what is required is proper open back trucks to do this if it were to happen. Now, this is what officers have been investigating, and it is the shortage of those trucks, but probably more importantly, the shortage of HGV drivers, which they require, and the lack of availability of them that has made this actually impossible to organise so far around the district. But that doesn't mean to say that officers don't keep looking and inquiring to see if there is any availability. But the problem is organising a collection for the whole district.
Okay.
Queries?
Well, I'm still concerned. You know, I just don't see how the two things square off. On the one hand, you know, we've sadly had an instance where, you know, for whatever reason, a member has, you know, had to apologise, and then you know, the operation that's at the basis of that is being used by the executive to you know, to effectively make a decision. And I'd like to hear from the monitoring officer whether that is correct.
Sorry, what's correct?
Whether it's correct that the executive, you know, the conclusions that the executive are drawing from the fact that it isn't cost effective to run this type of service. I don't see how you can draw that from what was effectively a flawed and well, I'm not going to say elite, it would be wrong for me to say illegal, but an inappropriately commissioned trial.
Councillor Smurden, I think we would agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I think the point is that the price at which those bins were emptied was considerably lower than anybody else who has been professing to do this individually with residents around the district. That's the first thing. Okay. So it is more akin to the cost, if you like, or it is nearer the cost of our service than anything else that I've certainly heard of. But I think Mr. Bates will give you a reply as well.
Thank you, Leader. So, Councillor Smurden, thanks for your comments. Can I refer you back to the report 1.1? I think the key thing here is that the executive on the 14th of October had already considered a detailed report covering all of these issues, which was supplemented by information provided by both the lead member and by Mr. Molyneux. There was a comprehensive report provided at that time. And as a result of considering that report and all of the information provided within it, the executive concluded regretfully that it had to suspend the garden waste service. The issue today is the consideration of the additional learning that has come from what happened in Morwell. So I think it's additional and supplementary to that. It's not instead of that. It's simply adding to that information which the executive has already considered and decided upon. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does as an explanation, but I'm sure everybody would agree that this isn't really, it's not really the correct way that the council should go about organising trials. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Sorry, thank you.
I would agree with that, Councillor Smurden. It's unfortunate that it's happened in this way. I've got Councillor Pannell next on the list.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Pannell, just to warn you that if you run close up to 11 o'clock, we shall have to stop because we're going to have 2 minutes silence at 11 o'clock. So
quite understand. Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I think I'll finish before 11 o'clock. Just a point of clarification, because as you're aware, the sound quality is not very good for us listening at home. I understood you to say that Councillor Hopwood had left the meeting. Has she declared an interest?
I think by leaving the room and doing so, she has, and I think it's accepted.
Yeah, de facto she has, Councillor Pannell.
That's fine. Thank you. That was the first point I made earlier on. As the Councillor Hopwood has been found to be in breach of the Code of Conduct, I'm surprised that there's no reference made to this in the chart of decision making under legal and governance, because clearly a member breaching the Code of Conduct on this issue is an issue of legal and governance, and I would have thought it should have been mentioned there. That's just a point. Two specific questions. Where do we stand on insurance? What would have happened if a member of the public had been injured or property had been damaged? Would we be liable as the council, or would the contractors, or would Councillor Hopwood? That's an important issue. And I agree that it's specious to say that this was additional learning. I mean, to suggest that we should pay £3,500 of council taxpayers' money for learning that any of us councillors could have told a couple of officers in a brief session that collecting bins in a closely knit community like Woolwell was not indicative of how it would go in the rest of the rural areas. And that using inadequate vehicles and vehicles with no hoists, etc., would also not work. I'm just flabbergasted to how to understand that can be described as useful learning, when I think most of councillors could have told any officer that. I agree with Councillor Smurden. I'm very uncomfortable with this. I do not feel the executive should be letting Councillor Hopwood off the hook, I'm afraid, on this, because I think this was done in breach of our procedures for contracts, and that it would be a misuse of our council taxpayers to spend that money. So there was just one question, I think, about the insurance there and about the legal and governance.
Councillor Pannell, it was my understanding that Councillor Hopwood asked the contractors about their public liability insurance before she went ahead with the operation. But I'm going to ask the monitoring officer to answer the rest of your questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader. The question about standards, with hindsight, yes, perhaps we should include a sentence in the legal implications, but I would say they are set out in the report. In essence, the matter has been dealt with by me and the member. It is now resolved in terms of the standards issue, so you made a number of other points, and I appreciate we're getting on towards 11 o'clock.
We are. I think
that answers my question. Those are the questions. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to adjourn the meeting now until 2 minutes past 11. So the meeting is adjourned. Well, we can resume the meeting now. Is the streaming on? Thank you very much. Thank you. Who's next then? Councillor O'Callaghan, I believe you're next with a question.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but I do feel that the executive member in question should consider her position, because this is not just a backbench councillor making a mistake like this because they're not aware of how, you know, the system should go. This is a senior councillor, a member of the executive. So I would have to say that's my view, unfortunately. And I agree with those who've said that, you know, this is, and I've said it earlier, that this is conflating what's presented as a mistake as a trial, but with none of us councillors knowing this, and none of the public knowing, and the public, a lot of residents saying exactly what Councillor Birch has been saying, that why are they not getting their garden waste collected, at least as a one-off, because there is a contract with FCC, whether it's a statutory service or not is by the by. You know, the money that we've paid to FCC for this has not been paid, obviously, because there isn't a service. So that money theoretically is there in order to use in some way to collect the garden waste. And it's a very valid point. And a lot of people have been making it, certainly on local social media, and they're quite right to do so. And they're going to continue to do so in greater numbers. And this incident certainly has made matters far, far worse, because we're being asked to spend a lot of public money in order to correct a mistake which has benefited the constituency of an executive member, which does not look good.
Councillor Callaghan, I'm going to ask the monitoring officer to come in first, and then Councillor Baldry would like to reply to you.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Birch explained the position rather well and avoided raising the issues that you're seeking to raise now. I think the answer was given to Councillor Birch earlier, Councillor Callaghan, that we are going through the contractual process. There is a process to be gone through, and it isn't necessarily the case those monies are available at this time. But we were happy to provide the full advice to Council should that be necessary, and we will do so in exam session. Thank you.
Well, in answer to Councillor O'Callaghan, I am desperately keen to, at the very least, the minimum, do a one-off collection and empty all the brown bins of the 43,000 residents across the South Hams. The officers and I, but especially the officers, have gone out of their way enormously to find someone or someones, it could be more than one person, who is capable of doing that. We have not been able to find anyone. We have contacted all the people with the proper equipment for lifting up the bins and tipping them. And we have contacted private contractors like Biffa. We have contacted neighbouring councils, including, if I may say, a neighbouring council who suspend their garden waste service at this time of the year, and none of them are willing to take on the work which we would willingly have paid for. We would have been happy if it had been done by neighbouring councils on overtime over the weekend. There is simply no one available. And Councillor O'Callaghan or anyone else listening, if you can come up with suggestions of people who can together empty all 43,000 brown bins, at least on a one-off basis, I would be very grateful for that advice.
Right. I think we've got Councillor Kemp next.
Yeah, I want to reiterate what Councillor Callaghan has said. Obviously, with all of that money floating about that you've saved through not picking up the waste, then surely that money can be utilised to support working groups trying to set up their own solutions and initiatives to mitigate against the incompetence of the council.
Councillor Kemp, I don't know how many times we have to repeat that we have answered that question. This is, well, the monitoring officer has just answered it for you, but I will ask him to repeat the reply he's just given.
Thank you, Leader. The money is not necessarily available at this moment. We are going through a contractual change process And only at that time will we know whether the money is available. We will explain the full rationale in exempt session at full council, should that be necessary.
Okay, so we're still paying that money then to FCC?
I think, look, can we close it down there? Because you've had a reply to that question.
Whatever suits you, thank you.
Thank you. No, I think we've got two down the end. Councillor Birch.
Thank you. It seems to me that the issue is quite simple as a result of what the monitoring officer informed the meeting is that there was a contract between Councillor Hopwood and I will refer to the contractor as the Woolwell Brown bin collector. There was clearly a contract between Councillor Hopwood and the Woolwell Brown bin collector. That being the case, the liability for the payment of £3,500 rests with Councillor Hopwood. That's plain and simple contract law. Really, what you, as the executive being asked today, is to decide whether or not you want to make a gift of £3,500 to Councillor Hopwood. And I would think that surely you're not going to go as far as to put forward decide to make such a gift. Not only would it be, in my opinion, bring this council into disrepute, but I would also question the legality of such a decision. So I think it's very clear to me that you as an executive and you have received an apology from Councillor Hopwood. That being the case, following it through, it's unfortunately down to Councillor Hopwood to settle this bill and not this council. Thank you.
I'd like to bring the monitoring officer in on the point of the legality of the council paying the bill.
Thank you, Leader. I'm satisfied that the council does have the requisite powers to ratify effectively a decision that was taken by Councillor Hopwood without authority. Very positive, so.
Thank you. Councillor Brazil.
Thank you, Julie. Just to first of all say I'd like to thank Councillor Hopwood for her apology and contrition. It's a shame that some of her parliamentary colleagues can't follow her example. That said, however, this decision and what's happening here just seems to be wrong on so many levels. We've had the rather comical position where no interest was declared when John here managed to get out of the monitoring officer that there was indeed a contract between Council. Then there was a discussion between the chief executive and the monitoring officer, and then they decided actually that Nikki did have a peculiar interest and should leave the meeting. Just a sort of a snapshot of the complete shambles and chaotic process that is in place here. And I do think that I appreciate that, and I believe that Nikki has made a genuine mistake here, and I don't hold that against her. But I think that the way that this is just being shuffled under the carpet, yes, okay, we'll pay it and that's done, it smacks of establishment cover-up, whitewash, all those things that that I'm afraid brings this council into disrepute. I'm also interested to hear that having been found guilty of breaking the code of conduct, an apology, monitoring officers accept it, and that's just gone. I can assure you that when I've been pulled before the breach of the standards of code of conduct, it's gone on for months and months, and it's published in papers that then go out to the press. I don't see any of that. I presume that our press officer will be putting out that an executive member has been found in breach of the code of conduct, and they'll be putting out a press release to that extent. Putting aside all the things about the brown bin collection and all that, I think that this is just no way for a council to carry out this business. If I'm honest, I don't know how to get out of this, how you would get out of this predicament. But what I will say is that what's happening here today is not the right way forward. And that at the very least, this should be discussed at full council, so that all members have their opportunity to say in a formal meeting and to vote on the final decision. I'll leave it there.
Councillor Brazil, I think you're referring to a time when the standards regime was very different from what it is now. I don't recall the incident you refer to for yourself, and I therefore believe it was under a different standards regime to the present one.
It was, and I attended as leader of the opposition at the time with Councillor Brazil when that hearing took place, and it was the old regime.
No, I agree with the old regime, but I'm still not aware that if somebody, is it not the standards board that makes these kinds of decisions? The monitoring officer, in my view, has just has unilaterally decided that this is a breach, this is the recourse, and that's okay, move along now, nothing to see here. I'm not sure that is the right procedure for it. Well, and I'd like to know where that says that that's the way it happens.
Well, would you like the monitoring officer to reply to that? Yeah. Because it's obviously his territory.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Brazil. On becoming aware of the issue, it clearly was a breach, therefore it clearly required prompt action, and that prompt action was taken. So there was no complaint before me at the time. I was able to act as I did, and I would, as you know, I would do the same in respect of any other allegation if I was able to speak to a member about a standards issue and deal with it in that way, in a way that allows the matter to be resolved promptly. As you know, I'll seek to do so. I didn't have a complaint, so I wasn't advised to follow the standards procedure. And as far as I'm concerned, this matter has now been publicly aired. It has been transparent about the behaviour. That the member has apologised. She has been spoken to in terms that made it abundantly clear as to what the consequences were. It would be a repeat. There should not be a repeat, because she understands the nature of the breaches that she has done. The circumstances, that is as far as the standards regime could go, probably in any event.
Well, as I said, this whole episode has set serious and unnecessary precedents on how things are dealt with. Can I just say that if anyone else is reported to the standards board, and quite frankly, the fact that she wasn't reported and you found a breach, I don't think that makes a material difference at all. The fact that that is how this is being dealt with. If there are any other examples in this council of breaches of the code of conduct that do not fit this specific way that this has been handled, then I think again that will bring this council into disrepute. So I say again that the way this is being handled is setting so many serious precedents of maladministration within this council that I think you should seriously look at yourselves and decide how this should be going. I mean, we have not only you said somehow that we had to, we had to have this meeting and it had to be so fast in order for the full council on the 25th of November. How long is that? That's a fortnight away. A fortnight away could be informed about what the executive thought. And that's why the 5 days wasn't acceptable. I mean, again, I say to you that the way this is being handled is no way to carry on and no way to run a council. And the administration here is badly at fault.
Councillor Brazil, the reason this meeting is being held today is because there wasn't another slot available, as I understand it, when everybody could attend on a Thursday morning. That's the first point. The second point is the monitoring officer has acted correctly under the present standards regime. There is no longer a standards board, as I believe there probably was in the time that you were referring to. And my caveat to everybody would be careful what you wish for. So I think we know this matter has been handled properly by the monitoring officer under the present regime. And you may say, I might agree with you that the present regime is not satisfactory but on the one hand, you may think it's not strong enough. On the other hand, I'm actually quite grateful that it's not as draconian as the previous regime that totally lacked any form of natural justice at all, which I'm sure you found out when you fell under it. So
It was extended for 6 months.
Well, there you go, you see. So I think, you know, but as I say, be careful what you wish for. That would be my caveat to everybody on that one.
Can I this is just to assist on the matter of the code of conduct. This is a matter that, as chair of our group scrutiny, we do have certain responsibilities. And I've had discussions recently with Councillor Smoke and with the monitoring officer and with Drew Powell about looking at the way it operates within the council. And in fact, what will happen, hopefully in the near future, will be a report coming to ONS. So it is under review as such.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. Yes, I think it is. Right. I don't think we have any further questions. I would actually like to adjourn the meeting. Oh, sorry, Councillor Long.
Chairman, sorry. I won't go over the ground that a lot of other councillors have already raised. There were questions that I would have raised, but they've been covered. But I would like some clarification from the monitoring officer. You passed a comment, I believe it was when Councillor Kemp raised the question about where residents had paid for contractor services to clear brown bins, that we don't have the legal powers, and yet when councillor, and needn't have been a councillor, arranges a contract with a contractor to clear the bins, you are now saying that the council obviously does have the power to pay that. I think there's most residents out there would see a level of sort of double standards in that, and I think there is, it conflicts with, I believe, good practice and what most residents would wish to see. Although having said that, I appreciate what Councillor Hopwood, has apologised about, but I have to say, her intent that, she felt there was a need for brown bins to be cleared in her ward is one that we all agree with. Yeah, she went about it wrongly and did it completely the wrong way, but I think the intention was there. And I think the thing is, a lot of other residents out there are doing exactly the same. They are implementing a clearance that they believe this council sort of was contracted to or would have done, and we've suspended it. But my question to you, monitoring officer, is how do you square up the fact that there seems to be a conflict in sort of you saying legal powers that we couldn't pay invoices from contractors where they've cleared it, but we can in this case?
Good question, Councillor Long. My view would be that in this case, the member was intending to act or to use the localities fund, purporting to act as a councillor in arranging it, and therefore you can distinguish that between a private individual going about and making their own arrangements. On the face of it, the Councillor Hopwood was purporting to act as a councillor and was purporting to go about her duty or exercise her powers as a duty as a councillor. And therefore, it's appropriate in these circumstances for the council, for the executive to at least consider whether they should ratify, effectively post or ratify the decision, her action, so that they can pay the invoice.
Appreciate that response, and it's a good legal response. But I think in the court of public opinion out there, it would be seen wrong for this council to
pay for that invoice. I can understand, and and to a certain extent, I have sympathy with Councillor Hopwood on this, but I think most people would see that, as others have had to pay, and it was wrong. It comes back to the thing of why can't we all do like that as councillors?
Decision for the executive, Councillor Lott.
Right, I'm going to adjourn this meeting for at least 5 minutes, and I would ask anybody who isn't an executive member or an officer to leave the room, please.
I do object and resent to being told that this is an establishment cover-up and everything is being swept under the carpet. We have had a full and open discussion. The papers were published. There is nothing being done under the carpet or in secret. Do you want me to refer to the recommendations at this point?
Yes, because, well, we move them together, but you can, yes.
Right, and looking at the recommendations, Leader, I would like to withdraw recommendation 2 and therefore ask for a vote on recommendations 1 and 3.
Seconded.
I second that. Okay, right. So we're taking recommendation 1 and 3. Is the executive in agreement with those?
That is unanimous for 1 and 3 recommendations.
Thank you very much. And I'm now going to invite Councillor Hopwood in to make a statement.
Thank you, Chairman. After listening to the debate and not wishing to bring this council into disrepute, which is why I made my apology in the beginning, I will pay the invoice for £3,500 for the collection of garden waste within the ward I proudly represent. Oh well, out of my own pocket. I hope this brings to an end the matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hopwood. I'm going to close the meeting now, so that's the end of all the